Outside, up here, I quiet my nerves. It's windy and cold, but I only notice the weather enough for it to register. I'm in my element. For me, this is where my race begins. When I'm inspecting the course, there's no room in my thinking for anything else. I don't talk to anyone. I am focused, calm, almost clinical in my approach. There's only me, this start, these gates. For a few quiet moments, I let nothing else in. And this is a paragraph from the book we're going to talk about today, Rise by Lindsey Vonn.
But before we get to that, I want to welcome you all to Performers. This is the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches, and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Greg Young, and you've just heard from Dr. Duncan Simpson. And as sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies, and habits that propelled the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. So, Duncan, why this book today?
Great question. You know, growing up as a sports fan, I've of course heard of Lindsey Vonn, but not an avid follower of alpine skiing. So haven't followed her career and didn't know really too much about her, but was fascinated to dive in. And, you know, she really is an icon of American sport. So just kind of a little bit of background for the listeners. If you don't know anything about Lindsey Vonn, she really is the most decorated female skier in history. She has 82 World Cup wins. She has 20 World Cup titles, 3 Olympic medals, 7 World Championships. But this book, Greg, this is so much more than just about kind of skiing. If you're not a fan of skiing, stay tuned. It's really a kind of candid exploration of her life, kind of 20-year career. But it's not just about skiing. It's about her mindset. It's about how she approaches risk taking. It's about her battles with injury. It's her battles with mental health. And to be honest, it's a really inspirational story. So what I wanted to kind of reflect on just quickly is the purpose of this pod for me is to really have that one-sided conversation with, you know, the all-time greats. You know, the opportunity to sit down with Lindsey Vonn just isn't something that, you get that opportunity to do, or sit down with Andre Agassi. So this podcast for me is really getting into the mindsets and having a one-sided conversation and learning from the very best. I mean, how much would you pay to sit down with Andre Agassi and ask him about his mindset, right? And I think as we go through this, one thing I wanted to reflect upon last week's episode with Andre Agassi was that, you know, we've been, you know, in this field of sports psychology, mental performance for the last 15 years. But the reality is we've been in podcasting for 1 week. So I think we had a couple of audio issues last week, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. And we're going to get better. We're going to get better every week. And so I wanted to share that with the audience, and hopefully episode 2 is better, and episode 3 is going to be even better. Moving on.
I'll hold my hand up. I'll claim the blame for that one. But we live and we push on. So let's dive into things.
Yeah. So I want to kind of really start at the beginning in terms of her upbringing and her family. So everyone always asks me where my drive comes from. The truth is, I don't really know. It's not a simple answer. Kind of like motivation isn't a simple thing. Different things drove me at different phases of my life. It wasn't the same throughout the beginning, middle, and end. It was at the very beginning, what drove me most was the fact that skiing was the only thing I was good at. So motivation, let's start there.
That's a big place to start. Motivation, I think, is something that's really important to everyone. And I think something that is, maybe we call it a foundational skill or a foundational element of sports psychology. And it's a really tough one to talk specifics about because it's very, very different for a lot of different people. Usually we talk about the idea of motivation being something that's either internal or external, something that kind of drives you from within, or maybe things from the outside that influence you and can kind of drive you and push you from things that don't come from within inside yourself. Why don't we bring it back to us? Motivation for you to have this conversation today, Duncan. Where's your motivation come from?
Well, really, it's hopefully about sharing some of the knowledge I've accrued over my career, but selfishly, you know, love spending time with you, chatting and kind of talking shop about the psychological side of performance, not just sport, but performance in general. And, you know, also kind of diving into the mindsets of these performers and recognizing that each person's journey is quite different. And you'll hear today, Lindsey Vonn's journey and the way she thought about things and the way she went about things is actually very different to Andre Agassi, and will be very different from some of the other performers coming up.
I'm going to take your example there. So that idea of having that conversation and sharing information with people, sort of education and learning, I love that too. And I think that's what I'd consider to be an internal or an intrinsic motivator, that love of learning, development of mastery, trying to get a little bit better. If, for example, we were in this for the fame and the fortune and the money, which, let's face it, we're not, we'd consider those to be external things. So maybe for a skier, if we project forward a long way, external factors might be that gold medal, it might be those 7 world titles that you've got. But an internal motivating factor is most likely just going to be that drive. What Lindsey Vonn talks about here is that feeling that she's very, very good at something, that she enjoys doing it. And that's the difference between internal and external motivation.
Yeah, and I think one more key point before I jump on is really that idea for everybody is that over kind of a, over the year, over several years, your motivation is going to change. It doesn't have to be the same thing. The thing that got you started may change over time, and I think that's an important point to resonate as you move forward. There's not just one thing that can motivate you. So she says, in my family, there was never a question of if you skied. All of us did it. Since my dad was a skier, I grew up surrounded by ski culture and supported by his guidance. He'd been a world junior champion and had skied for the US national junior team. And it was a pretty big deal until he blew out his knee when he was 19. My dad also taught me the importance of the psychological components, such as visualization, preparation, and focus.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of a sort of tale as old as time, right? Where you step into the shoes of something that perhaps a significant person in your life, usually a parent, maybe even a sibling, kind of almost paves the way a little bit for you, no pun intended, but kind of plows the snow so it's easier for you to go through. So I think having the experience and the knowledge of someone that's sort of been there, done that previously, definitely provides a little bit of a soft landing into sports for a lot of people. If you talk to a lot of youth athletes, motivation or the reason they get into something is often because there's someone ahead of them, parent, sibling, someone significant in their life that's tried that sport before and gives them an opportunity to get involved.
Absolutely. And she continues to say, I'm lucky that skiing was a shared passion. It gave us a special bond. And I know my dad was happy that I took it up as strongly as I did. Over the years, no matter how many things shifted and developed between us, skiing always brought us closer together. And I think you're talking right there, that relationship, that shared bond is something incredibly important, and it's an incredibly important part of her story. And kind of for context of kind of how early she started, she says, the first time he put me on skis, I was 2.5. I don't remember this either, but I must have liked it enough to want to keep going. My first real memories are for a couple of years later. I would always hit his hand away whenever he tried to help me. I can do it myself. Even then I was stubborn and I wanted to do it on my own. So she started pretty young, Greg, 2.5.
Definitely a lot younger than I started you were there when I started skiing, and it wasn't a pretty sight. And it definitely wasn't when I was 2.5. Yeah, definitely starting them young, and we've seen people there. But I think that little glimpse in that idea of I can do it myself, that idea of autonomy and motivation, really wanting to do something for yourself. That's a really good indicator for me that from a very early age, even if she was conscious of it or not, that she's kind of driving and pushing herself forward, even in these really early moments.
Yeah, and an important part here is where she grew up. She grew up in Minnesota, so a pretty cold area, and not too far outside of Minnesota is a ski area called Buck Hill. So, pretty easy. And she said we skied almost every weekend, but most of my training on Buck Hill happened under the lights after school or at night. The setup was actually perfect because I could go to school, train at Buck Hill in the evening, and get a lot of repetition without even realizing it. So, if Lindsey had grown up in Florida, we wouldn't be probably talking about Lindsey Vonn, the skier. So geography matters, and having access to facilities, and in this case a ski hill, makes a big impact upon your potential trajectory.
Yeah, environment is huge. And we can talk about environment being kind of what's your home life and how things set at home. What was your dad a junior Olympic skier? But literally the environment that you're in, you're absolutely right. There's a reason that we get a lot of great golfers out of Florida. There's a reason we get a lot of great surfers out of the coast of California. Environment really matters. So having the ability to go and do this over and over again, every night, every weekend, after school, whenever you can, environment plays a huge, huge role here. We could open the box of, the can of worms about nature and nurture. But if you don't have a mountain near you where you can actually ski, no matter how good your nature is, it's going to be really, really difficult to progress within that sport.
Absolutely. And, we had a concept last week in Andre's autobiography when we talked about kind of deliberate practice and repetition. And I'd love you to kind of riff off this when you hear this next paragraph. It says, when you're first learning something, you need to log those long hours. You need that repetition. If you want to be great, the quantity of training matters as much as the quality. Eric, who are coaches, who's a legendary coach, that's another kind of factor. Really pushed us on having 1,000 gates on a weekend. We could do 1,000 gates a day. It gave us a good technical base, which served me well for my entire career. Since the only thing we could do was train, I learned how to love it. And a little bit of context here that she goes into quite detail in the book is Buck Hill, which is a ski resort, as I mentioned. It's quite short. It's not one of the huge mountains. So what happened was that the training she did, there wasn't a lot of long runs. So it was a lot of repetition. You go quickly through the gates to the bottom, back up through the gates again. So 1,000 gates in a weekend. So just a lot of repetition on technique, where actually if she was kind of brought up in some of the bigger mountains, that repetition or just the quantity of that repetition, she believes wouldn't have had the impact that that obviously living at Buck Hill did. And the other piece that obviously helped Lindsey early in her career, she had a legendary coach at Buck Hill. There's a legendary coach called Eric Saylor, and he'd coached, now he's coached kind of over 51 years, I believe, and had coached, say 25,000 athletes and numerous Olympians. So she's got an environment, she's got a dad who loves it, and she's got a legendary ski coach. So all these kind of factors, when we look at her career, these all contribute, and that's not taking anything away from Lindsey. That's just kind of context. So let's just kind of revisit quickly, like, what are your thoughts on that repetition piece?
Yeah, there's two real things that jump out to me here. I think let's go with the kind of the short runs first. So the short runs and having a legendary coach, right? Like you said, context is king here. If you had, let's say that you had one long run that took, let's say, 30 minutes to get down. Or you had one short run that you could do, let's say, 3 times within that 30 minutes. So it kind of took 10 minutes to get down. That's 3 opportunities for feedback as opposed to 1 opportunity for feedback. I mean, when we talk about deliberate practice, we mentioned this last week with Andre, it's like that goal of trying to get a little bit better. And part of that is to receive feedback, hopefully as soon as possible, connected to the event that you've had. So if you do sort of a third of that long run and don't get the opportunity to get feedback, you're just going to continue. And it might be a little bit of sort of error carried forward, right? Where you continue to make the same mistakes and you don't get the chance to really course correct until you get back to the top of the hill. But having those short runs lets you take small digestible pieces of information from your legendary coach and immediately apply them with kind of the minimal amount of time between things. The second thing that really kind of differs here between sort of Andre's story from last week and Lindsey Vonn's story from this week is repetition. Now, Andre's repetition, we talked about the dragon last week, right? And that wasn't the nickname for his dad. That was the nickname for the ball machine that kept firing out the ball at 60 million miles an hour. Now, when you think about a ball machine, usually, and probably the ones that Andre was on back in the day, would be shooting the same ball out at the same speed, at the same trajectory, to the same position. So forehand, forehand, forehand all the way. So that's very much the same thing, practicing the same thing over and over again. Skiing down a mountain, even if you're going through the same 1,000 gates, is going to be different every single time. So, it's kind of that, it's almost philosophical. If you can't step into the same river twice, right, it's going to have changed in some capacity. The mountain's going to change. The conditions are going to change, whether the sun or the cold or the ice or the snow, how the powder's changed, is it groomed. So we get a lot of what we call variability in there. And variability, that's really, really the king. It's repetition without repetition. So you might be doing what looks like the same thing over and over again, but because there's such subtle differences within it, you learn to navigate those subtle differences and kind of build out a different or a bigger set of plans to deal with those situations.
Yeah, and through those repetitions, something that they picked up on early that she was very good at, which is really important for a downhill skier, is speed. And this is kind of, these next few bits really dive into that concept. She says, even when my dad would say she should work on her technique, Eric just shook his head. She's fast, he replied. And she's fast for a reason. You can't change what someone naturally wants to do. You're fast the way you are. That's the best piece of advice he ever gave me. So this concept of finding what you're good at and not changing it, I think that's really important no matter what kind of performance domain you're in. It's very easy to make altercations with, technique or strategy. But the coach is saying, like, speed is what counts here, and she's fast. Let's not mess with that. And that's from an early age.
I think this is a really, really important thing for anyone who is coaching or anyone who is mentoring or anyone who's providing feedback or information to anyone who's listening here. The temptation of a coach, and this is a coach at all levels, we see it a little bit more with sort of novice coaches as we do with what we consider expert coaches. The desire to get in there and coach, to make changes, to alter something, to tweak something. Sometimes that comes from a position of insecurity where you feel like, well, if I'm a coach, I should be coaching. Sometimes the best advice is to actually take a breath, take a moment, stop. Don't actually coach in the traditional sense of things by providing information, and just kind of let the athlete get on with it. If the athlete's good, if the athlete's fast, let the athlete be fast. Don't step forward, resist that temptation, and sometimes step back and allow the athlete to kind of own that space and own that performance. And it seems like Eric has passed that on to Lindsey's dad here, that little bit of nugget, that little wisdom to take a pause and to take a step back and let the athlete figure it out.
And there's a key affirmation in her story. And she says, I have so many fond memories from my childhood, but one of the greatest, most validating memories from my life came the first time I bombed down a hill ahead of my grandpa, Don. At the bottom, he skied over to me and said, "Oh my, you're fast." He was beaming. He didn't say I was fast for a girl. He didn't say I was fast for a kid. He didn't quantify or qualify his pride or astonishment in any way. He just said it like it was fact. So she's getting affirmation about this idea that whatever she's doing technique-wise, she is fast. And again, that kind of reinforces everything that you've just been saying. One of the obviously elements that come along with speed is danger, and even from an early age. But danger is something she kind of talks about, and she talks about it in the concept of adrenaline and that physiological response to it. She says it's basically as dangerous as it gets. If you ask anyone who's an adrenaline junkie, they'll tell you risk is what is exciting. That's the adrenaline component, pushing yourself to the very edge, to where you almost lose control. So, adrenaline, Greg, what are your thoughts on this notion of pushing yourself to the very edge? And she's got this idea from a very early age.
Yeah, adrenaline it's on a knife edge, right? Sometimes it can be a wonderful thing. Sometimes it can be a bad thing or an inhibitory thing. If you think about what it is, right? It's a natural physiological response, and usually adrenaline is there to prepare us for an action, right? It's kind of the big activating substance, whatever you want to call it, in the body that is just going to make everything fire. Everything gets super sharp. Everything gets turned on. The attention is just exactly where it needs to be, and all systems are activated. Now, the downside with adrenaline and potential upside is how we view that feeling, that rush of adrenaline that we get. So let's take it out of skiing, because I've got a lot of experience with skiing. Let's put it within the world of roller coasters. Some people love roller coasters. I know you enjoy them. Some people hate them. I hate them. We probably get the same sort of physiological response, right? So we probably get that same surge in adrenaline. When you get that surge of adrenaline, you might see it as being exciting. You might see it as something that you really enjoy. You might really, really like being in that physiological state. In that context, I hate it. It's a fear thing for me. I'm scared. I don't feel like I've got control. My body's signaling to me, hey, this is not a place that we want to be. Let's get out of this as soon as possible. And it has a really, obviously, a negative impact on me. So if we take this and put this on someone who's standing on the top of a mountain and whose job it is to get down there at the bottom, if you've got a massive spike of adrenaline, which, like I said, is just a physiological response, and you see it in a good way, that can be something that's great. That can be something that literally propels you down to the bottom of the mountain and really tunes you into performance. If you're at the top of a mountain, maybe it's the first time you've ever been there, and that real surge of adrenaline comes and you see that as a terrifying thing, that's going to be a real inhibitor for your performance. You're not going to be loose. Your body's going to be tight. Your mind's not going to be on the task at hand. And ironically, it's going to put you in a position to probably hurt yourself. So it's going to feed into that fear a little bit. So, we talked last week about pressure and the perceptions of pressure. Adrenaline is very much the same thing here. It's just a thing, but how we perceive it or how we make sense of that in the moment is what's really going to have the impact on performance.
That's fantastic. And Lindsay summarizes it incredibly well here. And really what skiing is, she says, who can throw themselves down the mountain the fastest? I'll think and hope the answer is me. That's something that definitely separates me from everyone else. I have no fear. I am never afraid of anything, including crashing. This is my strength and also my downfall. And we're going to dive a little deep into kind of risk taking a little bit early on, but that notion of throwing yourself down the mountain the quickest, that's really what skiing is. So one concept we have talked about briefly in the past was goal setting. And I think this is going to be a theme that comes up through for all performers. I don't think it matters what domain you're in. But she says, one thing that I've always loved about sports is that every day you can set a tangible goal. And every day you can meet that goal. That feeling of accomplishment is hard to replicate in other areas of your life. So right there, she's kind of that idea of having a small accomplishment every day is so important to her.
Yeah, I would say if you're motivated or internally motivated, what we're talking about here is that mastery, that I'm just going to get a little bit better every day, and we're going to kind of accrue all of those improvements, and at the end of X amount of time, we're going to be able to look back and see that. Sometimes it's hard to notice progress, and being able to clearly define what you think that progress is going to look like and set those little goals, that's very, very important. What just sprung to mind is, obviously, I'm looking at myself on camera here. I had a haircut yesterday. And you only know you need a haircut at a certain point when you go, oh, my hair's too long. You don't notice it every single day, right? But if you specifically took the time to kind of measure and evaluate where your haircut was every single day, you would see incremental growth in your hair. And that's kind of what goal setting is. Instead of waiting for a long period of time and going, oh, just noticing that you've made progress, you can really kind of chop those goals up and set them out in a very, very logical and almost linear sequential manner and tackle those things each day. And like she says, that idea of measurable progress, that's hugely important when we come to goals. We really want to be able to see us and ourselves making steps towards where it is we want to go.
Yeah, she does definitely talks about that gratification of putting in hard work, seeing the results, and then setting new goals. And that concept of hard work really kind of resonates with her because of her role models. And she said, I grew up seeing hard work all around me, and it gave me a certain level of perspective from a young age. It was really about her grandpa. And she says, he didn't complain. So why would I? Because I saw how hard my grandfather labored for everything that he had. I never felt entitled. I appreciate everything our family had, and I've always tried to stay humble. So that concept of hard work, pair that with goal setting, that's a crucial kind of combination right there.
Yeah, we'll leave the fact that you didn't give me a compliment about my haircut. We'll leave that to one side. I did open the door, and you didn't choose to walk through it. But yes, absolutely right. So hard work. What's another name for hard work? It's effort, right? So if you're putting in a lot of hard work, but there's not necessarily a goal, there's nowhere you're trying to get to, sometimes that hard work can just be for the sake of hard work, right? If it's not lined up to any specific direction, it's really hard. If you have goals and no hard work or no effort, then your progress towards those goals certainly isn't going to be as quick as you probably hoped it would be. Now, if you can get that hard work aligned with a specific goal that you're working towards, and those two things are working synergistically, so I know where I'm going, I know what I'm trying to do, and I've got the desire and the effort and all of the will to put into it to get there, man, that is an absolutely lethal combination.
Yeah, and talk about lethal combinations. Like, what else did she learn from her family members? She said, there's a lot of strong characters in my family, all of whom taught me some valuable lessons of toughness, and my mum is just as resilient as any of them. Her strength is immeasurable. So she learned hard work from granddad. She learned toughness from her mum. And then she also says, one thing I learned having 4 little siblings was how to remain calm through chaos. Because my mum couldn't run or ride a bike, I would often be the one in charge. If we went to the lake near the house, I was responsible. So she grew up, there was hard work, there was toughness, but there was also calm. She had to remain calm in the chaos, and there was also a sense of responsibility. So from a mindset and from a maturity point of view, I mean, inevitably all those things played a role.
I think a potential little pitfall that people can fall into is feeling like you've got to learn all these things specifically in the context in which they occur, right? So I've got to learn hard work and I've got to learn how to stay calm. I can only learn that through sport, or I can only learn that through my performance domain. There's lots of little nuggets everywhere. If you look at certain things with a lens on, going, okay, well, how can I look to I don't know, how can I look to my uncle who's a factory worker for what it means to be gritty or to be resilient or to be dedicated to someone that's in the same job for 30 years and gets up at exactly the same time and goes and works really, really hard. What can you learn from them? I think it's great to look to expert performers, and that's exactly what we're doing here, right? We're trying to learn the lessons from the best. Where did the best learn them from? She's learned them from her mom. She's learned them from her grandpa. I don't know if we can get an autobiography of Lindsey Vonn's grandpa. I'm not certain who he is, but like all these clues and all these different areas that you can pull from, they're everywhere around you. You've just got to keep your eyes open and continue to have that sort of mindset of learning.
You make a really excellent point. And she also learned from also one of the greatest of all time and a real role model of hers, an Olympic skier. Some people know the name Peekaboo Street. It's a very unique name. But she had the opportunity when she was a young skier to meet Peekaboo. And she says, to see someone who had built so much, who was so well known and popular and had the medals and trophies, was like encountering a superhero in real life. Meeting her made everything I wanted real. It was like, wow, this is possible. It exists and I can do it. When Peekaboo signed my poster, she wrote, follow your dreams. Looking back, I'm sure she put that on everyone's poster, but I didn't know that at the time. She told me to follow my dreams, and that's exactly what wound up happening. That was the day I went from being, my dream went from being this amorphous thing into actually taking form. I wanted to be an Olympic champion. So right there, she kind of meets her role model, meets her hero, and she really takes something very concrete, like follow your dream. And she's like, okay, that's it.
Yeah, I think the important thing here is knowing what that dream is. Follow your dreams. Well, that is great advice, and she probably did put that on every single poster, and that would be different for every single person whose poster she wrote it on. Lindsey clearly has that goal of, I want to be an Olympic champion, and it's sort of that, manifest destiny, as it were. I want to think about this thing, and that is going to be my ultimate goal. As we know, being an Olympic champion is a huge goal, and there's lots and lots of things needed in order to get there. But having that sort of a North Star or a guiding light or this really big thing that you want to work for, this dream, but knowing that that can actually be achievable, you've met someone who has done this, right? It's not this ethereal or this amorphous thing. It's something that's concrete, something that's real, and you've met someone who's actually done it. The power of that is immeasurable.
So how does this plan come to light? Well, she says, not long after meeting Peekaboo, I sat at the kitchen table and I told my dad I wanted to ski in the 2002 Olympics. To his credit, he didn't bat an eye or make a joke of it or dismiss it as some kind of childhood fantasy. He didn't pat me on the head and say, that's nice, honey, go play with your brothers and sisters. He didn't condescend me. He took my words as seriously as I intended them, which is not always an easy thing when you're talking to a 9-year-old. Instead, he gave me an honest reaction. He says, you'll be 17 then, my dad says, and it's going to be a little bit of a lofty goal. Of course he was right, but that didn't stop him from rolling up his sleeve and devising a game plan. My dad saw that I had talent, and he wanted to do everything in his power to help me rise to meet it. He recognized that I had a sense of drive and ability in me. He took me and my lofty goal totally seriously. Together, we sat down and created a 10-year plan leading up to the Olympics and beyond.
Let's take a look at the process of goal setting. What does good goal setting look like? Where it starts with a dream, it starts with a vision, it starts with this big thing, hopefully as concrete as possible at the end of it. And what we call that in the field is we call that an outcome goal, right? It's the ultimate destiny that we want to get to. Ultimate destination, same thing. That we want to get to, the ultimate desired outcome. Now, usually what happens is people have that nice and clear, but that's where they leave it. They don't necessarily build the path to get there. So obviously what Lindsey and her dad are doing here is building out this 10-year plan, right? Now, 10 years is a long time, and it certainly doesn't have to be as long as that. Goal setting process can be as long or as short as you want it to be. But what they've done here is they've looked to set benchmarks, right? And a benchmark is, if we look at things, and there's a couple of different things at play, We could call this a process goal, right? So a process goal is, what are the little things that I need to take care of in order to get there? So there might be some very short-term goals, these little process goals. There might be some performance goals or some intermediate goals along the way, some sort of markers or some benchmarks, the phrase that they used, that are a little bit bigger, a little bit more meaningful, a little bit more tangible along the road. That you can kind of go through and check these off. And all of that comes from knowing what the destination is. What is the outcome? And then how can you build back and put that plan in place of, these are the things that we are going to have to do, steps that we're going to have to take, benchmarks that we're going to have to hit to even give ourselves a chance of getting towards Olympic performance.
If you want to go down this path towards the Olympics, he explained, you'll only get there if you're willing to do things others won't. He laid it all out in terms of the pros and the cons. You'll miss sleepovers, you'll miss prom, you'll miss out on a lot of things that other kids have, and you'll get to do other things in return. You'll travel the world, and working hard more important than going to parties? For me, the answer is yes. There's a plan in place, but he's also not going to sugarcoat it, and he's going to tell you the pros and cons. And I think sacrifice, often when we speak to athletes, this concept of sacrifice has a negative connotation. But the reality is that if you're on a certain path and you're on a path to greatness, then things are going to have to be prioritized. And I don't like it as a negative connotation. It's a prioritization around what is important and what isn't important to you. And going to parties and prom and sleepovers wasn't as important as traveling the world and, going to the Olympics. I think one other thing that I'd love you to kind of reflect on, talk about, is that the reality, especially, during adolescence, is we have a strong human nature to want to belong and to be part of a group. And the reality is that group is usually average, and that sense of belonging, like you want to be part of the group, but that group is unlikely to be on that path to greatness. So she can't necessarily be hanging out with her neighborhood friends day in, day out, because they're on a very different path. And that's not an easy thing to kind of digest as an adolescent, to say, hey, I'm not going to belong. I'm actually going to do something very different.
I think it is a very, very hard thing to do. The desire to be wanted and included, I think, isn't just an adolescent thing. That sense of belonging is something that goes with us for an entire life.
Yeah, and her mindset was as follows. She says, I'm going to be the greatest skier in the world. And I decided to pursue my dream. There was never a point where I doubted my dream. Never a point where I thought, maybe this is wrong. I simply felt that that's what I was made to do. And now my father knew it. So that single-mindedness, has a plan, knows the sacrifices, knows what she needs to do. And I think this is such an interesting part, given the episode 1. She says, if you're reading this and thinking that this is some kind of Andre Agassi type relationship, where my overbearing coach of my father pushed me into a sport I didn't love, it was nothing like that. No one was forcing me to keep going.
The thing that really jumps out to me here, and reflecting back to what we talked about in our last episode with Agassi, is the relationship that she has with her father, and certainly with her coach here. It sounds very collaborative. It sounds maybe like being almost on equal footing, even though obviously she was very, very young when she started it. It seemed like her voice has been as valued as anyone else's voice within this process. And when we reflect back on Agassi, that certainly wasn't the case with him and his dad. It was sort of my way or the highway. And even as he progressed through to the Bollettieri Tennis Academy, that was kind of the sort of the status quo for him throughout his whole career. And I think this feeling of collaboration and this feeling of involvement and this sense of investment, first thing we talked about was motivation. These are all things that feed that intrinsic motivation for that person to want to keep pushing on and pushing and propelling themselves forward.
And that's a great segue into this section. And said, what my dad helped me grasp was the simple fact that I love skiing. Fully, completely, passionately. It isn't enough to simply show kids what could happen further down the road. You also have to help them discover what they love and then show them why they love it. Help them to uncover the why they do it, and make sure that they continue to answer that question of why over and over again. You can't just ask it once and consider it settled. It's a constant dialogue, and there's always needs to be an answer. Maybe it's just one answer, or maybe there are several, but maybe the answer changes over time.
I think the sticky mud that people can get stuck in is, well, they figure out their why once, and then that's it. They feel like they can't divert from it, or it is that has to be the North Star all of the time. And as you develop as a person, as you develop as a professional, as you develop as a performer, as you develop as a coach, athlete, whatever it is that your field of interest is, you're going to change. You're just going to fundamentally change who you are as a person. So that why is going to change as well. If you have family, or if you have any sort of life circumstances, these goalposts are going to shift a little bit. And when we talk about moving goalposts, usually we see that as a bad thing. Really what that is just an opportunity to recalibrate. If you go back in and recalibrate and go, well, actually, the why hasn't changed that much, the goalposts haven't moved that far, that's fine. If you go in and realize that, oh, actually, they have changed quite a lot, my why is different, that's just an evolution of who you are as a person. But you've now still got a clearer understanding of what that North Star, that driving force, that why behind your motivation, behind why you do the things that you do and what you're trying to achieve. You have a greater appreciation and understanding of that, and you can align your behaviors to it.
Yeah, and she said what's really important is the process of questioning, and I think that's an important piece for everyone to kind of grasp. Through that process of questioning, it's reflection. It's that concept of reflecting on what is important to you. Why are we doing what we're doing? And when we reflect, from kind of a Buddhist term, reflection brings wisdom, and probably wisdom beyond her years. But you can ask, it doesn't matter what age, but that constant questioning, that process of questioning led her to have real clarity in the way she wanted to go about things. And that clarity kind of aids to this bit. And she says, I kept the Olympics in mind in a singular way and put my blinders on when it came to everything else. Like most things in life, it was a trade-off, but I never doubted that it was worth it. Of course, I wish I'd had a real education with real teachers and a normal social life, but I wanted something else.
I think it's really interesting where, this idea of putting blinders on can be seen sometimes as a negative thing. Oh, he's got blinders on, he can only see one perspective. But when you're really striving for something, and something that's so clearly articulated and so concrete instead of amorphous, sometimes having the blinders on can be that. The reason we put blinders on horses during horse races is to stop the distraction and kind of all the other sensory input coming from all of the different places. For someone that's trying to achieve a goal, sometimes putting the blinkers on, or the blinders as they're referred to in the United States, can be a positive thing too and help drive towards that behavior.
Yeah, and I think on that path, he says, my dad kept track of everything, even before it was technically necessary. A lot of times when you're younger, you don't need to keep track of your times. But my dad would be on the side of the hill timing me and offering advice. He wasn't overbearing at all. He wasn't in anyone else's business, like one of those obnoxious little league dads. He was actually pretty reserved. He was just thorough. After every run, he gave me a gauge. Was I too fast? Was I too slow? Where was I making mistakes? How was I finishing? I always knew where I stood. So the dad is, again, giving that continuous feedback, but also reinforcement and encouragement.
The thing that stands out here is the kind of the obnoxious little league dads. If we took that, was I too fast? Was I too slow? What mistakes were you making? How were you finishing? Those are all things that an obnoxious little league dad could do. I think it's important to think about, and we don't really get a sense of this here, is that's what was being communicated, but also how it was being communicated to her, right? I can't imagine he was yelling it at her. I can't imagine when she made a mistake, it was made into a huge big deal. And, I would have done this different and tied to self-worth and things. I can imagine, based on everything that we know so far about her dad, is that the delivery of that really good information was probably in a way that was useful and landed with Lindsey in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and I think, we hear kind of a little bit more. He did things that other people weren't doing. He says, we also took a different approach when it came to fitness. With my father's guidance, I focused on how to be a better athlete outside of skiing. I would do hundreds of push-ups and sit-ups a day. Every weekend, I'd run a mile on the track, even though I hated running, something that has always physically hurt me. But what 12-year-old runs a mile every weekend? No one. But I inherited my dad and my grandfather's mentality. If you want to do something, then you do it. You work hard at it and you don't complain. And, she said, and this definitely set the tone for becoming a stronger athlete. If you want to be better, you have to work both on the hill and off it. So again, potentially doing things that other her peers were not doing, even probably her skiing peers were not doing.
I think one of the themes that we'll find through a lot of performers, and I'm speculating and pushing through here, is trying to find an edge, not in the skiing sense of finding an edge, but finding an edge over competition, and finding little ways that if everyone is doing this, what is it that no one's doing, and how do I try and tap into this? So for her, it sounds very much like sort of cross training, right? Doing the stuff off the skis, off the hill, and doing that in a different environment to try and get an edge where maybe your competitors are just kind of hammering it in terms of the skiing element, but always trying to find that edge and sort of push the margins of what's possible within that sport.
Yeah, and she says, of all these changes in priorities and focus, they were just a prelude to the bigger sacrifices to come. And as I mentioned, they were from St. Paul, Minnesota, and skied at the local ski hill. And the reality was that was probably going to take us so far. And the family recognized that they were going to have to do something a little more drastic if she was going to reach her goal of being an Olympic skier and really ski bigger mountains and be in a different environment day in, day out. And she said, they decided the whole family would move to Colorado permanently, a choice that was made without consulting me. In fact, they didn't say anything about it until the day they already sold the house. My parents sat us down one night after dinner and told us they had some news. We were all under the impression that Vail was only temporary, so all of us were stunned. As soon as the words were out, my siblings and I burst into tears. So we heard about Andre. Andre moved from, Las Vegas, Nevada, down to Bradenton, Florida. His dad moved him at 14, and now her dad recognizing, look, Colorado is probably the place you need to be. Vail in particular, this is where you need to be, and we're going to move the whole family. And again, for her, like Andre, this is a bit of a shock. And Lindsey gives some insight into kind of her mindset and emotional response. And she says, it was a dramatic moment in the life of our family. This isn't what I had in mind when I said I wanted to go to the Olympics. It seemed like such a harsh punishment for everyone in service of my goal. Moving was emotional for all of us, but it was hardest on my siblings, who didn't want to leave Minnesota. The whole family had relocated so that I could ski, and that was difficult for me to live with. So again, that burden, she is now taking a burden on herself based on kind of that family response. And, inevitably, we're going to hear about pressure, because now we've done this for Lindsey, for her career. And as a 9-year-old, when she set this goal, this isn't probably something she figured in her own mind what was going to happen.
I think the phrase that pops into my mind now is shit's getting real, right? It's now maybe, hey, it would be great to be an Olympian, and we've got this plan, and would this person from a small, a relatively small hill in Minnesota be able to do this? But now we're taking you to Vail, and I don't know much about places, but I know Vail is pretty hardcore when it comes to its skiing. And if you are going to progress and become someone that's an icon in the sport, you're going to have to be in some sort of environment that facilitates that, and that certainly sounds like one. But I think you're absolutely right. It is going to be difficult, and there's no doubt it's in the mail. Pressure is coming.
She said, when my father and I embarked on this goal, I had always thought of it in terms of what I had to sacrifice to get there: time, sleep, friends. Prior to my family's uprooting to move to Colorado, it never occurred to me that my sacrifice would become everyone's. Often when my siblings had a hard time, I felt guilty that it was my fault, which put a lot of pressure on me. Suddenly, there were actual stakes to these choices that I had made, and I could see them firsthand. When one of my siblings had a bad day at school, failure or disappointment on the hill now meant that something that had just been mine a few months ago was now everybody's. Everyone had changed their lives for me. I needed to win, not just for me, but for them. Now it was all about my family. And there's real similarities we heard in Agassi's story when he started to travel, and he talked about the Agassi clan and that they were shelling out a lot of money for tournaments and hotels and flights and car rental. Now she's really saying this goal of my why has now changed. It's changed from, we're not wanting to disappoint people. It's now changed to, I need to make this, I need to achieve this goal, because otherwise, what is all this for? I'm letting my family down. So the pressure is on her now, and that's how she's kind of processing this. And that's a lot to take on as a young athlete.
We're starting to see that little divergence away from that intrinsic or that internal motivation. When it came to skiing, it had always been about me, towards that now external motivation, those external factors. Now it was also about my family, right? So where we know that really strong motivation and that really real driving factor from an internal perspective can be really, really good. External things can have their benefits, but usually start to add levels of pressure. We're starting to see that creep in here a little.
So how does she deal with it? She says, when I was a junior racer, everything seemed pretty easy. I just skied and things went well. But as I got older and began to realize how important each race was, I started putting more and more pressure on myself. Learning to calm my nerves was a process of trial and error. So how did she go about it? I studied the pressure I felt in those situations. I observed what I was thinking when I had a good run. How did it feel? What did I do differently? Then I would try and repeat it. I learned to analyze my own psychology, figuring out what makes me tick. I saw that when I skied well, my mind was clear. This realization was a turning point for me. And I saw firsthand how important it is to harness your anxiety and to have a clear mind. Wow, great kind of that fundamental concept of self-awareness. And we're seeing that her ability to analyze her own psychology and figuring out what works for her and what makes her tick.
Fundamental, foundational, evergreen, all important. Self-awareness is the underlying factor for everything that you can do in terms of trying to improve your own psychology, your own mental skills, absolutely anything. Having an understanding of who you are, who you are when you perform at your best, at your worst, and getting an understanding of, well, what are those mechanisms like? What is it like? What am I thinking about? How am I feeling? What's my body doing? All of these things improve self-awareness. If you aren't self-aware, if you don't end up having an understanding of your performance, the only way you're going to get to self-regulation is just by accident. In order to get there, you've got to start with self-awareness to be able to develop a set of mental skills to be able to self-regulate.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue. She says, when you're skiing at that level at such a young age, so much of what you're doing is learning all the time, learning how to deal with pain, learning how to deal with anxiety, learning how to win. You don't have the routines and the self-talk to minimize anxiety and maintain mental strength. So you're constantly testing new strategies, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. Of course, I didn't actually know what I was doing. I was just trying to improve. So again, that self-awareness is that constant learning, constant evolution, constant trying to figure out what works. And I think she's discovered this on her own, and she's doing a lot of this kind of internal dialogue and internal processing, as you just mentioned, by herself.
No one knows their performance. No one knows their psychology better than themselves.
Absolutely. She says, one thing that my dad always drove home with me was this idea of mental toughness. Mental toughness, mental toughness. It got to the point where I was like, if you say mental toughness one more time, so I'm not sure I love the term mental toughness. I think that term toughness resonates a lot with athletes and coaches. It's kind of in their vernacular. I think resilience, mental flexibility, we can go down a lot of different paths. But just this idea that the dad is, instilling in her this idea of, you're going to have to be resilient. You're going to have to be tough. There's going to be things thrown at you, and you'll need to figure some of this stuff out, is an important message. I don't know if you want to kind of dive into anything around mental toughness.
Yeah, let's have a little chat here. So mental toughness, if you can define it, you're probably wrong, because there's a million different conflicting. You go into the literature and there's a load of different definitions of it, and it's a kind of a hard thing to pin down. But I think you're right. It does resonate with athletes and coaches, and I think it's got that sort of sexy feel to it, right? That toughness, mental toughness. It's got a like an SAS or a Navy SEAL crawling the barbed wire through the mud type feel to it. And you've got things like resilience or grit or conscientiousness, if we go back to sort of classical psychology. And they can get muddied. They can kind of overlap in certain areas. And I don't think it's about discovering what the definition is of these things. But I'll give you my perspective, and it would be really cool to hear what your perspective is of these things. I think mental toughness for me really ties to this idea of perseverance. It's when you're experiencing things that are hard, having whatever it is to continue to battle through that and hopefully come out on the other end, hopefully with the result that you want. That's mental toughness for me. And maybe a sort of a toolbox or a suite of skills, whatever. Resilience for me is that ability when things haven't gone your way to be able to bounce back relatively quickly and recover, be resilient, and then kind of get ready to go again. So mental toughness for me is kind of something that happens in the moment during performance. And resilience is usually something that happens in those between moments of performance, where you get a little bit time to process and kind of come back. One thing that I really liked, and I forget where I heard it was the idea of perseverance, which is kind of that combination of persevering and resilience. And it's that, like, I'm going to fight tooth and nail and be mentally tough and persevere through this thing. And then if things don't go my way, I'm going to be able to bounce back and be ready to go again. So those are kind of operationally how I define them in my mind. What's your take on them?
Yeah, I think for mental toughness, I'd keep it simple as do you have the mindset and the capabilities to meet the challenges that practice and competition bring your way? Can you handle the challenge that competition brings your way? And if you can, you probably have the requisite level of mental toughness. So if you don't have that skill set, then it's probably something you need to focus on and work on. And again, I'm not going to dive too much into definitions, but it's just that the capability to meet the challenges that are put upon you. And what it is interesting is to hear her definition. And she says, in essence, mental toughness for me became shut up and do the work. The weather is bad. So what? When I go to the mountain, my knee doesn't hurt. This is in line. This is the line I want to take. This is what I want to do. And this is how I'm going to do it. It's almost like Rocky. Whatever challenge you're up against, whether it's media pressure, the course, the weather, the competition, your own body, you cannot let it get to you. You are in control. That's what mental toughness is to me. With practice, I learned to channel my thoughts in the right way, to stay focused, to be stronger than whatever was happening around me. So I think that probably aligns with everything that we've both said in terms of whatever's thrown at you, you figure it out, you find a way. And if you want to use one term to encapsulate that, for her, it's mental toughness. For us, it might be something different. One of the concepts that she brings up over and over is this idea of competitiveness. And she says, over the course of my career, I find I do much better when people doubt me. The press, my coaches, my competition, my teammates. Whenever anybody questions my ability, that became part of my drive. And I think this idea is interesting because not everybody, thinks that way. Is when they get doubted, that they absorb that self-doubt. But she loved it. When other people doubted her, that drove her, that motivated her.
I think this, the doubt and impact from other people around you can absolutely be fuel. When she talks about that being part of her drive, the thing that pushes her forward, I think that it is absolutely something that can do that, but might not necessarily always be the best place to get that drive from, right? It's usually pretty quick, burns out relatively quick. It's not that stable. It's usually pretty unsustainable, right? Like, yeah, it's like throwing gasoline. It's gonna start a fire very, very quickly, but it's also going to burn out very, very quickly, as opposed to sort of that motivation that comes from within, that she wants to do this for herself. That's kind of like starting a good campfire, right? Where you've got a little bit of kindling and slow burning wood and it continues to burn and continues to go. It's just a better source of fuel. Not saying that external factors and people doubting it doesn't have a positive impact, because obviously it does, and that's her perception of things. But that long-term, more sustainable drive, we want that to come from places that we can control. And ultimately, we can't control what other people think of us.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because she follows up here and she says, because I found so much focus and drive, whenever someone didn't believe in me, I continued to use the negativity to my advantage as much as possible. I was working hard to prove myself, and a big part of my motivation stemmed from wanting recognition, especially from those who doubted me. One little phrase of doubt would be enough to fuel me for a long time. So again, is that the optimal kind of source of motivation? Would probably say not. But I do kind of draw parallels when we think about Michael Jordan's documentary, The Last Dance. That's kind of what Jordan did. Jordan fueled himself and would make up, negative comments in the media. He would kind of pick fights with opponents as a way to fuel himself, to aid his motivation. And again, is it right or wrong? I think we'd probably suggest as coaches, we'd probably say that's less than ideal, but it worked for her.
I think it's very, very short term. If you think about Jordan, he found a new person to argue with in his own mind every 20 minutes, right? It was a continual battle, and that actually takes a lot of effort to figure out, all right, who's pissed me off this week? Who's going to be that short term fuel? I would say also for Jordan, though, he has this desire to be the best, right? And I think that's the thing that sits in the background and provides that real strong fuel.
Well, I know that, throughout the book, and we really recommend you buying and reading the whole book, is that, she had some real challenges with some of her coaches, and in particular male coaches, and used that as fuel. So here's kind of a paragraph with regard to her male coaches. She says, a lot of them were men's coaches who transitioned into women's coaching, and I don't think they understood women's psychology and how we needed to be coached. Perhaps it goes without saying, but coaching women is different than coaching men. In a lot of ways, coaching is like being a psychologist. We're going to kind of see this in future episodes when we dive into some of our coaching autobiographies. It's not just about the athlete's physical performance, but also about managing the athlete's emotions and getting them to focus during times they're distracted. As with anything else, everyone has a different style, and there are some coaches who are better than others. Then there are some who come right out and say, wow, that fucking sucked. That style worked for maybe one or two people who enjoy harsh criticism, but the rest of us didn't flourish in that environment. So this concept of coaching men and women, and they had a lot of male coaches coming in and coaching the females, and some of their approaches in that hyper-negative environment really didn't suit Lindsey.
Yeah, I think there is and rightly so, a big push presently to coach women as women, and I think that's a lot of the focus there is along the sort of the physiological side. Females with unique, well, not unique, just different to males in terms of their physiological needs, as it were. And I think the same can be true about the psychological element of things. I would not necessarily worry, but I wouldn't necessarily cut it in terms of it's straight down gender lines of men and women. Men, you coach this way, women, you coach this way. But I think it really does come down to exactly what she says. It's about figuring out, how does this person need to be coached in this moment? What are the unique set of, the unique psychology that this person brings to them? What's going on in their life? What's going on with their context? What's the environment that can get the best out of this person as an individual?
Yeah, Lindsey continues and she says, in general, I don't think that women respond well to hyper-negative coaching. I'm not saying that women can't take criticism. We absolutely can. I think women in particular need to be approached in a certain way, a nuanced way, where feedback is mixed with encouragement and positive reinforcement. It's not sexist. It's just how we operate as human beings. And I think it is that. It's understanding how one individual, male or female, how do they want to be coached? What's optimal for them? And also, like, what do they want, but also what's needed. Inevitably, through this book, there's some personal relationship stuff, and one piece of the book that we do need to dive into. There's a section in the book where her parents are going through a divorce. They're going through they're going through marriage difficulties, and she's just started a relationship with then to-be husband Thomas Vonn, and she was spending time away from friends as well. So there's kind of this in the background. She said, initially, I'd started what would become a year-long pattern of using skiing as an escape. Skiing became a place I turned to avoid dealing with difficulties in other parts of my life. It was both my greatest love, but also my most effective emotional crutch. But eventually, even self-medicating on the slopes no longer provided the distraction that I needed. Anyone who has experienced depression will know what we're talking about. In a way, it's like you stop being yourself and you turn into a person you don't recognize. You feel hopeless, kind of like you're falling deeper and deeper into a black pit and you're powerless to stop it. You fight hard to get out of it, but no matter how much you try, you can't move. When you're depressed, there is no why. Everything feels pointless. Why talk to anyone, I'd think? When no one wants to talk to me, why bother? Why try? It feels like there's no way up and no way out. So there's obviously a background here. Potentially she's got a new relationship, not spending enough time with friends, but her parents obviously going through marital struggles, and she's using skiing, as she says, to self-medicate and to get away. but not dealing with the kind of the 6 inches in front of her face, which is her inability to handle her emotional response, and she's going into depression here.
I think this is a really great recognition for recognizing again that performers, high-level performers, the best ever to do it, they're people, and people go through stuff. Those people sometimes have a way to immerse themselves in other things, whether that's skiing or tennis or fill in any other activity as a distraction. But at their heart, at their core, they are still people, and they are people that ski, people that play tennis, people that golf, all of those different things. As you say, looking at the 6 inches in front of your face, if Al Pacino give us nothing else, that's that great line. And dealing with who you are as a person and taking a moment to recognize that if I'm not happy outside of my sport, it's going to be very, very difficult to be happy and perform at my best within my sport. Go back to that idea of self-awareness. Self-awareness, hugely important in sport performance, unbelievably important in just everyday life and knowing who you are as a person. In order to flourish as a performer, you need to be in a position to flourish as a person. And if you're not, it's something you need to take a little bit of stock at, ask for help, talk to people about, normalize having these conversations, and really just become aware of what your circumstances are to be able to work through these things.
Yeah, really, really well said.
I think the real positive of having these conversations is that we start to become proactive instead of reactive. So we normalize mental health. We normalize the fact that people are going to struggle with it. It's going to be an up and a down, excuse me. And we normalize having these conversations when mental health or mental illness isn't an issue. When it's just when things are going well, we're talking about mental health. When things are going not so well, we're talking about mental health. It doesn't have to be something's going wrong for you to reach out and have that conversation. You can have that conversation when things are going really, really well. Actually, sometimes it's easier to have that conversation when things are going really, really well. You can be a little bit more open. But I think, have that conversation, reach out, use resources. There are things that are available online. Duncan, I'm sure we can put some stuff in the show notes for this in terms of, mental health resources. But the best resources are the resources that you've got around you. That's talking to people that are, important to you, people that mean something to you, friends, family, even co-workers. I think the opportunity to interact with them and normalize that conversation, hugely, hugely important.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue into this next section, kind of transitioning away from the mental health bit, but into kind of her psychology on the course again. And she said, generally the most common thing I observed in other races was the fear of taking risks. They might ski well, but they'd be afraid to push it to the limit, to toe the line right up to where they might crash. They may even go right up to where the limit is, but they didn't touch it, which isn't going far enough. There are so many factors that play into every race, but if you can eliminate just that one, if you're willing to go just beyond the point where everyone else is, it gives you a leg up on that competition. And as I stared down the course, I was not afraid.
I think the thing that jumps out to me is, as I stared down the course, I was not afraid. What were you? Right? Because the absence of something means that there was probably something else in place there. Whether that's confident, whether that's brave, whether that's, ready, prepared, whatever word you want to put in there. I think that's really important. It's not about not being afraid. Potentially about being something else, something that's more useful, something that's more productive for your performance. And I'm sure we'll dive in and get a little bit of an understanding of what that is for Lindsey.
Yeah, she's definitely racing to win. Not that kind of fear of failure. And people would ask me, where are your balls, Lindsey? How are your balls? But honestly, that's what downhill skiing is, having balls. At its core, downhill is about who is willing to throw themselves down the mountain the fastest. I have my foot on the gas pedal until I'm crashing into a fence. And that is why I crash into fences. I'm never nervous about going too fast or trying to slow myself down. It's all or nothing. When the going gets difficult or is challenging, you can count on a lot of girls to back off. Certainly not everyone, but at least a third of the field. If you want to be the best of the sport like skiing, then there's no room for fear. Races are won or lost by how far you're willing to push yourself, what you're willing to risk, and where your limits are. You have to go all in out there. Push to the edges of what's possible. Just go for it. And I think, fear aside, it's for her, what I love about that mindset, and we can contrast with Andre a little bit, was just that willingness, like, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to put myself in line and I'm going all in. And there was no, like I'm going to play safe and hope the other person makes a mistake that we saw in kind of Andre's first Grand Slam finals. It's really this notion of playing to win.
The line in there that I really like is there's no room for fear. And I'll go back to my earlier point. If there's no room for fear, why is there no room for fear? What's occupying that room? What's occupying that space? And the words that jump into my head is, when you ask that conversation, where are your balls, Lindsey? Usually we're talking bravery, we're talking confidence, right? Your belief in your ability to do something, and trusting that you can navigate being on that edge, right? If we talk about the other third of the field, if I'm speculating, they don't trust that they can live right on the edge there, that they can push it, and that they trust in their capabilities to be able to navigate that really fine line between flying down the hill as fast as possible and flying down the hill uncontrollably into a fence, right? Lindsey Vonn, to me here, speaks like she's got confidence, whether that goes back to a technique that coach and dad talked about being so good, whether it is she knows she can take the bumps, whether she knows and she's confident, she trusts herself to be able to navigate turns or bad terrain or whatever it is at high speed. That's the thing that is stopping fear from coming in. Because I'm sure that at moments it does come in, but it's probably very quickly elbowed out the way by something that's more positive and productive for performance. So I really like this. There's no room for fear, but what's in there?
Yeah, and she may touch on this and may answer that question. She says, if you were to take a look at my brain, I'd suspect you'd see something similar to Alex Honnold, the climber from Free Solo, whose amygdala, the part of the brain that registers fear, is nearly impossible to provoke. I feel the most at home when I'm going 80 miles an hour down the side of a mountain. I am perfectly calm and confident in those moments that other people would find terrifying. So in those moments, I think there's that element of focus there, that she feels most at home in that environment. And you'll hear kind of contrasted later, that confidence and fear off the slope and in the public eye and in fame and celebrity was not natural and did invoke that amygdala and that emotional response. But here she's just focused. And she also says, to me, there's only adrenaline, that thrill of being alive. That's the most exciting feeling there is. And that comes to kind of that interpretation of the situation. How are you interpreting, going 80 miles down a hill? For us, that'd be terrifying because we're not in control and, we don't have that experience, but it does come to the interpretations of our kind of our physiological and psychological response.
Yeah, I really love the parallel with Alex Honnold. There might be a book. I don't know if he has a book. It might be an autobiography we read at some point. But I remember seeing an interview with him, and one of the things that really stood out, he says, "I don't feel adrenaline. If I feel adrenaline, it means something's gone wrong." And I think that's really interesting. You're hanging by literally your fingers and your feet that high up a mountain with nothing to stop you. Obviously, there's parallels with hurling yourself down at 80 miles an hour. If you're feeling adrenaline, that's probably not a good thing. So, really, really interesting parallel between the two.
And that the concept that kind of runs parallel or the other end of the scale with fear is courage. And that concept of kind of taking action, she says, sometimes having balls can also mean having the courage to do things differently, to refuse to be boxed into expectations. The better I skied, the more the more taking risk became second nature. As long as the risk that I took could make me faster. So again, she had courage to do things that other people wouldn't because she didn't have the fear. So I think that idea of courage is something that I like to promote in athletes. And courage is not necessarily the absence of fear, but it's doing things even if you don't feel a certain way about it. And she said everyone was nervous, and I could see it in their eyes, in their body language. The first girls to go didn't ski aggressively. They didn't attack the hill. They were passive, hesitant, afraid. The kiss of death to downhill. The second you give yourself over to the course, you're done. If you're not attacking the course is attacking you. So anything with regards to that concept of courage and kind of attacking versus being on the defensive.
Yeah, the idea of courage or bravery, if you act courageously or brave and there is no fear there, then that wasn't acting courageously or brave. That was just acting. I think you hit the nail on the head with the idea of in the presence of the thing that scares you, right? Or the presence of fear, behaving in the way that you actually want to behave. I think that's really what the definition of courage or bravery really is. I love this idea of attacking the course as opposed to the course attacking you, right? Playing on the front foot. We saw this very much with Andre in the last episode, was when he's playing on his terms and playing on the front foot and demonstrating his ability. That's really, really where his best performance lives. It wasn't, oh, I'm going to sit back and see what my opponent gives me. You know, he talked about the idea of pressing, right? Where it was just kind of conducting as opposed to really bang, getting in there and directing what needs to get done. Sounds like there's a lot of parallels here. Whatever the equivalent of playing your own game is for a skier, because you're not really playing a game, but like doing things within your control and committing to your game plan the way that you want to do it, you know, taking the bull by the horns, whatever weird idiom you want to put in there. I think that's really where great performance lies, is being on the front foot.
Yeah, and for context for the story throughout the book, obviously we heard about this dream, right? The dream of the Olympics. Well, the first couple of Olympics didn't quite work out. You know, she performed well. She went to 2002 and struggled in 2006, and 2010 was really that opportunity in Vancouver where, you know, she was regarded as the best, you know, skier in the world and hadn't got the Olympic gold yet. And so what does that bring? Well, that brings a ton of pressure. And she says, I'd gotten better at dealing with nerves. I understood how to focus my energy to calm myself while also keeping sharp when it came time to compete. But it's one thing to feel nervous the morning of a race. This was something else altogether, all-consuming, never-ending. From inside out, it was the pressure that even now, all these years later, is difficult to describe because it was simultaneously so welcome and also such a burden. After both of my previous Olympics hadn't panned out the way I'd hoped, everything was riding on Vancouver. I was still chasing the dream that I'd had since I was 9 years old, not just to make it to the Olympics, but to be an Olympic champion. Everything I had done, all the choices, all the sacrifice, all the years of work were leading up to this moment. This time, more than any other, I needed everything to line up. Oh man, I almost feel nervous reading it. But you can, you know, this is a dream she's chased her entire life. She's now been to a couple Olympics, didn't work out, and this is really last chance saloon, and this is her opportunity, and she is feeling it.
Pressure's an interesting one because we only feel pressure when something's important to us. If something doesn't matter to us or doesn't have any meaning for us, we're pretty much not going to ever feel pressure about it. But when something matters, when something's real, when something means something to us, that's where pressure comes in. And the sort of picture or image that I got in my mind was when she's talking about this, or when you were describing that paragraph, is a dog chasing a squirrel. I always think to myself, what's the dog going to do if he actually catches the squirrel? Doesn't really know what the next step is. It's kind of the pursuit that's the enjoyable thing. But once you get really, really close to that, that's sometimes where that pressure can come in a little bit more, because it is real. It is something you've got to deal with right now. There isn't, oh, it's 4 years from now, or it's 2 years from now. There's not this gap between it. It's very, very real. It's very, very important. And there's also the uncertainty of how things are going to go.
And let's lead into this race. Everyone knows most athletes love what happens on the field, and that's true. But it's so much bigger than that. The love is in the sum total of everything we do. It's in the training. It's in the mental preparation. It's in the anticipation before the race. It's in the excitement and the challenge of the race itself. The race itself is a couple of minutes tops. Everything leading up to that point, setting a goal and doing everything you possibly can to meet it, is what we live for. And in those instances where everything finally lines up and then culminates in a moment like this, well, it's indescribable. It's like every step that led you there stands to magnify this experience. My win was the end result of every choice and every effort I've made since I was 9 years old. It was the desired outcome for every sacrifice my family had ever made for me. It was everything. To this day, it was the most satisfying feeling I had ever known. And she says, when I crossed that finish line, no matter where you were, I think we all collectively let out a deep sigh of relief, knowing that the fight had been worth it. My family had spent every dime, every hope, and jumped every hurdle to get me on that podium. In the process, they had become my why. Wanting to prove myself, wanting to win, all became because I needed to validate their shared sacrifice. with the gold medal, I'd done just that. I had justified their fate. I think that's, an emotional part, to be honest, an emotional part of the story. She's giving a lot of credit and self-awareness and to everybody that had contributed. And it'd been a journey. If you read the book, it'd been a journey. It wasn't just, hey, she goes to her first Olympics and wins gold medal. It's everything kind of, it really is that fairy tale story that goes through those difficult moments, gets the opportunity in Vancouver, skis incredibly well, but it's also that relief. But it's the culmination of everything she's put in, all the choices, all the sacrifice, not just her, but everyone else around her. It really is that team.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely love it. I mean, how can you sum that up better than she summed it up? The thing I'm sad about is she used sacrifice again. I think, again, investment. Sacrifice is the things that you didn't do. She's talking here about all of the things that she did and that her family did do and all the people around her that she did do to get to where she is. And just, you're right, it is an emotional, seeing how that investment plays out and all of the things that were achieved as a result of all of those. And she uses that the little behaviors, the little things, goes all the way back to our goal setting conversation. Big thing over here, Olympic gold medal. Here's all the little things that are a little bit more digestible, and we can do those things. And when you add all those things up, and you get that big thing. And I just love the way that she's put that all together.
Yeah, something I mentioned when we were talking in Andre's story was this concept of kind of 7 basic plots or 7 storylines, and the book by Christopher Book, and I'm going to keep referring back to this. And one of the storylines is the quest. It's that journey. It's that, hey, we're going after something. And for Lindsey, her whole life was about this Olympic gold. It wasn't just about making it to the Olympics. It was this quest. She went on this quest for the Olympic gold and ultimately obviously made that quest. And I think, had she not won the Olympic gold, despite every other success that she had and an amazing career, she would have been known as the one she didn't win the gold medal. It wouldn't be, hey, she won 7 world championships and the most decorated female skier of all time is she didn't win the gold. But she went on this quest and she ultimately achieved it.
Sounds like I'm going to have to read this 7 basic plot. If you're going to continue to refer to it, I think I'm going to probably have to read it.
Yeah, and as she's going through this, she's transitioning into retirement, and she says, over the first year in retirement, I traveled through all the stages of grief: denial, pain, anger, bargaining, depression, reconstruction, acceptance. In a way, though, it was only fitting because it was like part of me had died. I needed to fully mourn that chapter that was closing before I could embrace whatever came next. And in closing, she says, I hope I'm remembered as one of the best. My sincerest wish is what I've done for skiing goes far beyond any number. I hope I've changed the game and paved the way for women in skiing to be much more than just for skiers to be just more than racers. I hope that I have showed you that you can be outspoken, you can be feminine, and you can be a badass all at the same time. And that's where we'll leave this portion of the podcast. Success leaves clues, and this is why we're doing this. And I'd love you to summarize it for the listeners, Greg. What are your top 10 life lessons from the autobiography Rise by Lindsey Vonn?
If you can't learn 10 things from this book, you're not here to learn. So first one, embrace focus and preparation. So obviously Lindsey's meticulous preparation and focus, especially before her races, really highlight the importance of mental readiness in achieving success. Number 2, harness the power of visualization. She talked about how her dad had helped her to develop this as a skill. Now, the use of visualization techniques to anticipate challenges and strategize specific responses is a powerful, powerful tool for success. Number 3, try and cultivate resilience and mental toughness. We talked a little bit about what those things are. Navigating your own definitions of those, important. But overcoming physical and mental challenges, as Lindsey did with her injuries and setbacks, helps to build resilience, which is essential for long-term success. Number 4, recognize the value of family and support systems. Lindsey's family played a crucial role in her journey, without a shadow of a doubt, emphasizing the importance of having a strong support network around you. Number 5, embrace fearlessness and risk-taking. Lindsey's fearless approach and willingness to take risks. You're traveling down a hill at 80 miles an hour. There's always going to be risk. Those are key factors in her extraordinary achievements. Number 6, understand the role of mental health. So acknowledging and addressing mental health issues, as Lindsey did with her depression, recognizing that there was something going on there and seeking out help, hugely important. It's vital for overall well-being and for performance. Number 7, value team dynamics and relationships. Understand the importance of being a good teammate and nurturing relationships. This can help enhance personal growth and team success. Lindsey, although she's an individual competitor, still performs as part of a team. If you still feel like you're an individual, figure out what your team is around you. Number 8, learn from every experience. Every race, win, loss, provides Lindsey with lessons that can help contribute towards her growth and success, and it can for you too. Number 9, set and pursue ambitious goals. Stretch yourself. Lindsey's journey shows the importance of setting high goals and relentlessly pursuing them. And finally, number 10, balance competitiveness with personal growth. While competitiveness drives Lindsey without a shadow of a doubt, she also recognized the need for personal development beyond her athletic identity.
Those are exceptional, Greg. Great takeaways. And something that I love to do now is kind of invert this concept of to-do list, but it's also, if you take the great Charlie Munger, for those who don't know, he recently passed away, and his idea was it's a lot easier to avoid being an idiot than it is to be a genius. So sometimes it's just, we think about what can we avoid doing that will ultimately lead to success. The psychology is sometimes it's addition by subtraction. So what are the things that we can avoid from Lindsey Vonn's story?
That's great. I really, really like that. I think first of all, avoid neglecting your mental health. Ignoring your mental health issues can have a detrimental impact and effect on both your personal well-being and professional performance, whether you're an athlete or a performer in a different domain. Number 2, avoid underestimating the importance of preparation. A lack of preparation can lead to underperformance. As consistent preparation was always the key to Lindsey's success, make sure that you're taking time to prioritize your preparation. Number 3, avoiding the fear of taking risks. So avoiding risks can limit the potential achievements and potential opportunities. Embracing risk is essential for breakthroughs. Number 4, avoid isolating yourself. Lindsey's initial isolation from her teammates highlights the importance of building and maintaining positive relationships. Number 5, avoid ignoring the impact of external pressure. Underestimating the impact of external expectations and media pressure can affect mental health and performance. Number 6, avoid overlooking the importance of team dynamics. So early in her career, Lindsey overlooked this, which could have enhanced her experiences and success if she'd embraced things a little bit more. Number 7, avoid neglecting personal identity beyond your sport or your performance. Focusing solely on your athletic or performance identity can lead to challenges in your personal development and transition, particularly post-career. Number 8, avoid disregarding your physical limitations. So while being tough and being strong and gritty and resilient can be a positive thing, pushing through injuries without proper recovery can lead to long-term injury and additional health issues. Number 9, avoid letting doubt overwhelm you. Easier said than done, but allowing self-doubt or external doubt to dominate you can hinder your performance and your mental well-being. And finally, number 10, avoid overlooking your small achievements. Focusing only on your major successes can lead to undervaluing the importance of those small victories and personal growth, particularly on your road to those large achievements.
I love those takeaways, Greg. Really appreciate you summarizing both sections incredibly well. For those listening, please click subscribe, follow along. Please share it with anybody else in your kind of circle of friends. We can only grow this podcast if we have your support. So please continue to do that. We look forward to many more autobiographies down the road, and we will end it there. So thanks ever so much.